floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I've won the distinct honor of trying to keep you guys awake over lunch, so I'm going to do my best. I hope you're going to work a little bit with me. So, who am I, other than just Janne Jensen? Well, I am a software engineer back from 2003, educated in Denmark. And at the time, I specialized in what was then called HCI. HCI is short for human-computer interaction, which is now, that was the then term for what is now called UX. But at the time, the industry had no idea what an HCI expert could do for them, much less why they should pay them. So there was no one in industry willing to give someone like me a job. So I became a researcher, because that way I could keep working with what I really loved. That went so well that they offered me a PhD scholarship. So I finished that in 2009. I went back to becoming a researcher again, and by then 8 years had passed, and I thought to myself, maybe I need to go out and pressure test this in the real world and see if this is just something we've invented at university to keep ourselves busy, or if it actually has any value to anyone. So that's when I went into industry. Started out as a senior interaction designer with Trifork. Trifork is a software house that makes apps and other types of software. At the time, it was primarily apps. That really went well. And at some point, somebody from Lego came in and wanted me on as a consultant. That ended up me going to Lego and working as a senior UX architect there. And then only half a year ago, I changed again, became lead UX designer with Elsevier. So that's a quick background, a little bit of my track record, so you know who's up here yapping at you. Right. So this UX thing, what's that even about? Just in case some of you haven't actually paid attention to the fact that this is going on, then here's a quick refresher. Like so many other things, UX has an ISO standard, and it says the effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction with which specified users achieve specified goals in particular environments. That one is not very operational, is it? So if you want something that is slightly better in definition, slightly more operational, that's this one. User experience design is the process of designing digital products that are useful, easy to use, and delightful to interact with. As you might have noticed, I have highlighted some words with various colors. You have orange, it says useful, and that's because effectiveness, that's essentially what that's about. Is it useful to you? Can it actually do what you need it to do? That's when something becomes effective. It doesn't mean that it's efficient as well. Efficiency is when it can do what you need it to do. How well does it actually do it? That's where the easy to use comes in. And then finally, it doesn't hurt that other than being able to do what you need it to do and do so well, it actually doesn't hurt if it delights you a little bit. If you sit back and think afterwards, that was smart, that was clever, that's a good thing. That's the delight part. That's where the satisfaction comes in. Right, so when do users have a user experience? Well, when you have a person and you have technology, and that person is using that technology for solving some kind of task consisting of a number of steps. That's when somebody has a user experience. And what does that mean? That means essentially that every time somebody is using some kind of technology, they are having an experience. And that also means that it's not a matter of whether or not it's there. It's not a matter of whether you have had a UXer on board when you were doing your software or making your software. That user experience will always be there. And the only thing we get to decide is if that user experience should be good. One of those experiences where you quickly and easily breeze through what you're going to do, put your check marks on your to-do list, and move on in your daily work. Unfortunately, it's not always how it goes. Sometimes that's how it ends up. I'm stuck. Now what? And I don't know about you guys, but I don't suffer in silence. So if I get stuck, people around me are going to hear about it. I will reach out to my colleagues and say, you know what? I'm stuck, I can't get this to work, blah, blah, blah. Have you had the same problem? And they say, no, that hasn't happened to me, but that might be because you're on a different platform than I am. Then they'll reach out to a third person, and pretty soon we've got 4 or 5 people wasting their time being stuck in some type of software. That happens over and over again. The key here is the user experience is always there. And the only thing we get to decide is if that's an accidental design or if it's a deliberate design. And that's where UXs come in. And this is, in immature organizations, this is how we treat it. We treat it as these kind of magical fairies that, you know, we'll just throw them in at the end of the project. They'll come in with their magic fairy dust and they'll make everything better. Well, newsflash, that's not how it works. We don't have a magic wand. We can't make miracles, unfortunately. It would be really cool if we could, then I could charge a lot more in salary. But that's not the case. We aren't some kind of magic fairy dust. We need to be involved throughout the process to be able to have an impact. And some might think that I come in and the only thing I'm interested in, that is to speak the user's case. And I don't care about whether or not you can actually code it. I don't care about whether or not marketing can sell it or any of these. My sole purpose is to make the user happy. Not so. Not so. And the reason being that there is quite a lot of stakeholders in this. Of course, there are user needs. There are users who have a need, and somebody should speak their case, their cause. But there's also a limit to what technology can do. And if we aren't respecting that, then we aren't ending up making something that actually is viable, something that can actually be produced and let out into the world. And finally, it doesn't matter that we can code it and I can design it if nobody is ever able to sell it. So the idea of a UX is actually to make that little triangle in the middle of those 3 circles as large as possible. Because if I can make as many user needs met as possible, while at the same time being as respectful as I can be about what the technology can and cannot do, and at the same time be able to make something that is actually sellable, that somebody can charge money for, that's when the user experience comes alive. Because until all of those 3 at least get some of what they want, this isn't going to be a product that's going to fly in the world. So that's my job, more than just speaking the user's case. How many in here knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Yeah, luckily that's fairly well known by now. For those who don't, it basically speaks about in what order and in what priority you fulfill your needs as a human being. Obviously, physiological needs are the very primary ones. That means food, shelter, sleep, warmth, those very, very basic necessities. Until you have those, you don't start looking for anything else. When you have those, then it is very important to feel safe. And that's when you then start making connections to other people. So you need to feel good about yourself, you need to feel good around others, and then at the very top you have self-actualization. That's the order in which we as humans beings fulfill our needs. If we were to look at, well, of course, everybody knows that unless you have Wi-Fi, then all else doesn't matter, right? That's the first thing. But if Maslow was a user, what would that hierarchy look like then? What would be at the bottom? What's the most important thing? Wi-Fi, yes. After Wi-Fi? Power? Yeah, true. But once the basic necessity of the physical platform is in place, what in a piece of software is the most important thing? I love that you're engaging. I'm getting shouts from everywhere. The most important part is data and content. Why am I saying that? If you've been in a larger city, well, even just in Riga, and you've had time to shop around here, if you've had a walk down the pedestrian street and you walk by one of those really expensive watch shops after hours, so one of those that sells Rolex, Omega, whatever, and you walk by that shop after hours, what do you see in the windows? What is in those windows? No, that's the thing. It isn't. Because there are so many of those that get robbed. So after hours, they take away all of the watches. And all that's left in that window are all of the display cases and all of the banners, all of the logos, all of that. That's the only thing that's left. How long do you stay in front of a window like that? Yeah, 1 second. Why? Because what you came there to see isn't there. That's exactly the same with software. That I can make the most epic interface ever. If it doesn't provide the user with the data and the content they need, they're not going to stay. So data and content, that's the foundation of everything. On top of that, we have functionality. The reason being that these days and age, we are usually not short of data. Data is in abundance. We have way too much, and we need to choose what to show the user. We need to choose what format to show it to the user in. So that's where functionality comes in. It has to be able to do what you need it to do. No more, no less. And then we come to the easy to use part. When it can do what you need it to do, we need it to do it well. And then finally, that's where the satisfaction come in. It doesn't hurt if it looks nice as well. And then you might look at this one and say, okay, that's all well and good, but where's user experience and all of that? Any idea? Exactly. All of it is user experience. If we don't have all of that, if we haven't put thought into all of that, then the user experience is going to suffer. Right. So this is what we're trying to do for our users. But when we're trying to do that, I don't do that alone. You don't do that alone. We do that together. We do that in teams. How many in here work in squads, scrum teams, that sort of thing? Yeah, most of us, right? We can't do this alone. It's always a collaboration. And that means that there's stakeholders involved, quite a lot of them. So there are project managers, marketing, legal, graphical designers, C-suite people, security, and of course, you guys, developers. But now that we're at the topic, I want to see a show of hands. How many in here are primarily developers in their daily job? Show your hands. Yeah, I figured as much. This is a developer conference, so that's how it should be. Anyone in here who do project management primarily? Not a single one. Wow. Oh, there was one. Thank you. Anyone work within marketing, PR, communications? One. Legal? Anyone work in the legal department? No. This is a hardcore developer conference. I like it. Anyone who is in the C-suite, so have executive? No? All right. There must be somebody who works within security, right? There's a couple. All right. It's a couple. All right. That's good to know. Then I know who I'm speaking to. But what I'm going to illustrate to you is what happens if all of these people are not necessarily working together in producing a user experience that's good. This one is a typical case. This is one of those, form fields that come up with a gazillion fields and a gazillion questions, and they are over-asking. They are over-asking. Whenever, and that's the thing, we know when they're over-asking. Whenever you're shopping online, you know they need your name and your address because they need to ship something to you. They need your email and your phone number in case something goes wrong. But if they start asking if you have kids, how old you are, whether you live in a bought house or a rented house, and all these sort of things, then they're over-asking because it's something that they don't necessarily need to know to do what you're asking them to do. And for a long period of time, people have thought that they would get away with that. But it isn't so, because the users know what's going on. They know that it's a quid pro quo, which is a very popular term these days. They know that whenever you're giving away information, that information is worth money. So they expect something in return. And especially if you're working within e-commerce or similar, well, they will go to your competitor who will ask less questions to sell you the same thing. So I get why it's typically product managers who will ask all of these things. Oh, but then we know our customers better, then we can give them a better product. But we're over asking. So if we want to ask all of these extra questions, we have to give something in return. And how could this then be done? Well, once you've ordered what you need to order on the receipt page, if you have a minute, we would like to get to know you better. And you can win something, or you can get something for free, or something. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big thing. But then it's more obvious that it's a quid pro quo. Then we're playing fair with people. So don't over-ask. Don't think we can get away with it without the users knowing what we're doing. We can't. This one is on marketing. How many of you had at some point had the Ask Toolbar installed? Be honest. Yes, exactly. How many of you let it stay installed? Yeah, exactly. This is what's going on. I get why this happens. Marketing is saying, okay, we have this product that has a really good market penetration. And now we're launching a really good new product, and we want to give it the best send-off we can. So we bundle it with the product that people already have. But it doesn't work. You saw how many hands were coming up when I asked how many would let it stay installed. It doesn't work. And not only does it not work, what's actually worse is that it will dig into people's trust. This is Oracle that does this. And they think that we won't know that they're sneaking this under the radar. And as soon as companies start sneaking things under the radar, we're going to wonder what else they're trying to sneak under the radar, and what things they actually got away with sneaking under the radar. So we stop trusting them. We stop thinking that they have our best interest in mind as users. So don't sneak anything under the radar. Don't have something auto-checked that you know fully well the users won't have checked if they had the choice. Because that's what's going on here. And just to give you an idea of what happens when it's people who are not tech savvy that this happens to, I have a very dear friend. He's super cool, he's super sweet, but he doesn't know anything about computers at all. And he called me up in panic one day. Janne, Google has gone missing. I was like, damn, Google is a big company, that's a lot to go missing. What really had happened to him was this. He had Google as his start page normally, and then all of a sudden he had updated Java because it asked him to, and he just pressed next as everyone does, and he accidentally had the Ask Toolbar installed and had reverted to a different search engine as default. And he had no idea how that had happened, why it had happened, when it had happened, and he had no idea how to get back from it. That's the kind of pickle that we leave our users in when it's somebody who isn't tech savvy like we are. So it can actually be quite a big deal to some people. This is also on marketing. Anyone in here is interested in NFL, in American football? One. I feel very alone, but I hear you. I love American football. So much that I usually play the fantasy league every year, where I compete against other people virtually on setting the best team round after round and competing against each other in a league. We were 10 people in the league, and it just had added value to me that I could watch the games, and at the same time I could follow how my own team was doing in the fantasy league. And this is what that looks like. So here we are, two up against each other's, and you can see here whenever like big things are happening as the score goes up for each team and so on. And that's quite cool. The thing is, the page doesn't look like that when I get in there. It looks like this. And it starts playing a video with sound. And how many of you have had that happen to you, that you go into some kind of page, some kind of app, and all of a sudden it starts blasting some kind of sound from some kind of advertising out into the room? Exactly. Everybody has tried that. And you're in a situation where one out of two things will happen. Either you jump out of your seat and you get so scared and your heart is racing because you didn't expect it. It's even worse if you've got headphones on and it comes straight into your ears like that. Either that, Or even worse, if you're checking this out at a point when you shouldn't be. So you sat in a meeting, and it's a boring meeting, and you just want to fiddle around on your phone, and then all of a sudden this happens, and you're called out big time as the one who wasn't paying attention. Either way, what happens when people do something like that? Users aren't exactly inclined to buy whatever people are advertising here. Quite on the contrary, they will make a mental note of never buying anything from these douchebags again. That's often what happens. So this whole autoplay thing, let's not do that. Luckily, a lot of companies have become wiser. So, for instance, Facebook, yes, it will autoplay, but it will never play with sound unless you actually ask it to. That's a much more reasonable way to do it. Then there's legal. How many of you read all of that before you press agree? Yeah. Sometimes. Most people don't. And legal realize this. And legal are actually, responsible people. They do what they, just like we do what we do for a living for a reason, so do they. They actually care about this stuff. And they realized people weren't reading this, and they were thinking to themselves, but you know what? People really should read this, because it's important. It actually does say a lot that is interesting to you and that can have ramifications. So what they did was that they now made you have to scroll down to make the agree button active. Did that make you read? No. So that was the wrong way of handling that problem. How could this be handled? No, not timer. But it can actually. Did somebody say summary? Yes. And that's a good point, because the two problems with this isn't that we don't want to know what we have said yes to. The two problems are that A, it's in legal language, which can be hard enough in itself if it's in your native tongue, but then when it's in a foreign tongue, then it becomes even more complicated. Two, it's way too long. So what you can do, split the screen straight down the middle. Have all of that legal hoo-ha on the left side still. And then on the right side, have something that says what it really says, and then sum up in really short layman's terms paragraphs. Chances are people might actually read that on the right side. And legal will still be okay with it, because what you've said yes to is the legal text on the left side. So if you want to play straight with your users, that might be a way to handle that. And then there's when legal just gets silly. Why, oh why would I have to check 7 checkboxes? No less. Is that really necessary? But sometimes it can also hit a bit closer to home. Graphical designers, they are sort of my breed, but even they can forget the user experience once in a while. This is pictures from a weather app that was developed by an agency in Denmark, and they set out to make the most beautiful weather app the App Store had ever seen. And part of that was, of course, simplicity. So they made this, and quite quickly when I started using it, yes, it is beautiful, but it was also lacking essential features that essentially rendered it useless to me and meant that I ended up using a different weather app altogether. And then you might say, oh, but that might be because they didn't really get to developing these extra features. This might just be minimum viable product. Well, yeah, but they had developed this, which was a way of, whenever you were exploring in the app, then you would discover new themes that you could then choose afterwards. If you had time to develop that, you had time to develop the actual features people needed. But that's when it becomes more important with how it looks and the bling bling than actual user experience. It's not just about the satisfaction. It's not enough with just the top level. You have to have all of the 3 levels underneath in Maslow's pyramid for a user. Yes. C-suites. How many in here have been in a situation where somebody with stars on their shoulders were hell-bent on getting a certain feature or something into your software? And you were like, why? But they got away with it because they had more stars on their shoulders. How many has that happened to? How many have actually come in and butted in like that? Yeah, it does happen. They have their pet peeves just like everyone else, and because they've got stars on their shoulders, they get away with it. So this one, QR codes. Yes. How happy PR and marketing are about QR codes. And then the final one. This happened to me. That was a client when I was working with Trifork, and one of the client's C-suite people were in one of the initial meetings, and at some point during that meeting he says, but you know what, we should have QR codes in the app. And I was like, why should we have QR codes? Because that's the new thing, that's what everybody has these days. Okay, but what's it gonna be for? I don't know, you'll figure something out. So that's yet another example of where we have a responsibility to say no, even if it means saying no to somebody who's above us, in the interest of the user experience. Because just because it comes from somebody further up high doesn't mean that it's a good idea. And now I'm getting a little bit too closer to home with you guys. How many of you have done this? Yes. It happens, huh? Which one? Developer use. Yeah, developer use, yes. This is... You asked which one of us has done this. Yeah, no, I meant encountered it. Sorry, yeah, yes. But there might also have people who have people here who have coded this, absolutely. But this happens to all of us in basically even medium and also small-sized companies, that this gets put into place. And it's quite silly because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because who breaks passwords today? Yeah, and what matters, or how do they do that? They have a special algorithm that runs the yeah, and the short version of that is it's brute force. And what is the one thing that matters with brute force? Length. So could we just replace all of these and say your password must be 30 characters long? Job done. But why do we then do this, and what happens? The thing is, this happens because that's what everybody else does. And not only does it not work, it actually makes the security worse. Why is that? How many in here can honestly, hand on heart, say that they have differing passwords for every single password they own and have ever created? All right? Yes, I was going to say, there is 3 reasons for having that. Either you have some kind of password manager, or you have worked out an algorithm that can create differing passwords for all of your sites, or you have a really, really special knack for remembering things. But the rest of you, I think that was about 10 people in the room. The rest of you, what do? I'm not going to have you reveal yourself. I'm going to say what I assume you're doing, and you can just silently nod if you agree. What you do is, some of you might write it down. I doubt that for most of you. Others will reuse passwords. Right? Yeah. And people actually get quite structured about it. They will say, top level, that's for my bank, that's for my work computer. Those are the unique passwords we have. That's the ones we don't use anywhere else. Then that's the ones that can cost us money. That's the ones that can cost us our livelihood. Second level, that's where it gets annoying. That will be your Facebook and your LinkedIn and all of your personal accounts for various stuff. It won't cost you your livelihood, but it will be a nuisance if that's hacked. And then there's the third level. That's the password that you will throw at anyone who will take it. Just silently nod if that's approximately accurate. Yeah. I mean, we might as well just do that. That's where we are silly level-wise. Absolutely, that was one of the reasons that multi-factor authentication was invented. And I told you recently about my friend who Google had gone missing to. This is us as developers, but this is what that's like for normal people. People struggle. This is difficult. And the question is, I don't know why we do this. I don't know why we ask this of our users. Because if I was to, in all honesty, look at you guys and saying, please run 100 miles per hour, you would look at me funny and say, I can't do that. But that's what this is. Because just like running 100 miles per hour is a physical limitation to the human body, remembering passwords, differing passwords for everything, just by sheer memory and nothing else, is a cognitive limitation to the human body. So if we wouldn't ask something that people can't do physically, we shouldn't ask them something that they can't do cognitively either. All right, and now to you guys. TikTok, what am I referring to here? Time, and what would that be in software? Loading time. Performance is the larger word. Just like if we don't have the data and content, it doesn't matter what kind of interface I make. It's the exact same thing with performance. It doesn't matter that I have made the most epic interface in the world. If it takes 10 minutes to respond, everybody has left. So performance, although that happens way deep down in the machinery, it is still a big, big, big thing in user experience. So when your designers are asking you, can we please do something about this loading time? Please take that seriously. Please start thinking about ways to hack that so we can do a better performance, because it is the number one thing that ruins a user experience. You guys don't want to be the explorer of browsers. Similar. Performance, yes, that is important when it comes to user experience. But back to Maslow's pyramid for a user, it doesn't matter if we don't have the data. It doesn't matter if we don't have the content people come there for. So whenever people run into this, in any abstraction of the word, that's a problem. And it's not like I don't respect and understand when you are saying to me as developers, you know what, that data is really hard to get to, or it's really difficult to calculate, or something like that. But trust me, I would not be asking if it wasn't something that was essential for the users. And that's where I need developers to work with me and dig deep to see if we can find it anyway, if we can find some way of solving it. If we can't find exactly what they're looking for, then let's start exploring what's the next best thing that we can give them. And the thing is, yes, I'm targeting you a little bit here, but at the end of the day, we are all users. You are too. Hopefully it doesn't go quite as bad as that. But I'm sure that all of you at some point, and please raise your hand if that has indeed happened, have sat at an interface and tried to get something done and you had no idea if you succeeded. Or, in fact, you might even have been sure you didn't. Yeah. We are all users. Everybody, every single one of us is sitting at the other end of somebody else's software at one point or another in our life. So keep that in mind. And then the last thing, and that can actually, I couldn't decide where to place that because that can be developer driven, but it can also be marketing driven, sales, PMs. But there are a lot in our organizations who suffer from featureitis. You've probably heard this term. Whenever we were doing something new and people had to, explain how good this was going to be, they would say, this is going to be the new iPhone. AKA, this is sleek, well-designed, easy to use, and it will make big ripples. And just so we don't start a religious war, it could be a Google product as well. There are some companies out there who have succeeded with this. Nevertheless, for some reason, we always end up there. Right? How does that happen? It happens because we put value equal to more features. And that's not necessarily true. I don't know if you know this. How many features of the ones that are available in Microsoft Office Word do you think are being used on average? All right, that's actually quite realistic. It's 8. So what do the other 92% serve as? They only serve to obfuscate the ones that you're looking for. And that's what happens when your interface starts looking like that. Chances are most of these buttons will have some value to a select few, but the 80-20 rule is in effect here. If you can't come up with a feature that has value to 80% of your users, chances are you shouldn't be putting it in, because it will be obfuscating everything for everybody else to serve the select few that you're trying to serve. That might be a different story, but then you might start looking into splitting it up to 2 products and stuff like that. So that's a completely different discussion. But it is, let's sometimes say no. Let's sometimes insist that we know better for the greater good of the entire group of users, not just the ones asking. I wish it worked like that, but it doesn't. So, we might start out by saying that UX is the UX designer's responsibility. So, as soon as I get hired, everybody else can do like this. That's your responsibility. Yeah, if UX existed in a bubble, but it doesn't. Because what happens is that then comes a deadline that takes a bite out of what we can actually find time to do. Then comes the budget. That takes a bite as well. Technology has limitations, takes a bite. Business has different ideas, takes a bite. Security will obfuscate things. The data isn't available. Marketing has different ideas. Legal has different ideas. And as you can see, at the end of the day, the UX ends up being this chewed up bubble that everybody has taken a bite out of. And the UX that you were able to deliver was the compromise between everybody's ideas. So, UX is not the UX designer's responsibility. UX is a team effort. And unless everybody buys into it, unless everyone swears on their mother and the Bible and everything else that we are, as a company, going to deliver good UX. That is part of our brand, that's part of who we are, that's part of the responsibility we have. Trust me, it won't happen. So that's what I'm hoping that you will go away from this talk thinking about, that whenever you're coding something, whenever you're making a decision in your code, if it could just briefly cross your mind, is this good for the user? Will they be able to use this? Is this something they want? Then I'm really happy. That was what I had for you today.
All right. So we didn't really have many questions in Slack. Maybe we can take some questions from the audience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes?
Just take the mic.
Thank you. Maybe you could advise what is better to validate UX hypothesis via user experiments? I mean, collect the data and analyze this, or just hire experts and ask them invent something beautiful and useful?
That's a good question. There are multiple ways of going about it. Two things I want to say here is that you can collect quantitative data, so you can do your analytics. That will give you a lot of statistics to run on, but the thing that won't get you is the why. Why are they doing what we can see that they're doing? On the other hand, you can run experiments, actual usability tests, doing interviews and stuff like that. That will give you a lot about the why, but you won't necessarily know if this is representative. So the strongest is to combine the two. To try to look at the numbers and see if you can figure out the why through the qualitative research. So that's one way of improving your product, is that have it out there, see how it performs, and then gradually start improving. That will be the case for a lot of people who already launched. However, of course, that is very reactive rather than proactive. So if you are actually in a situation where you're launching a new product, I would instead, of course, involve people who know about good design and have them involved right from the beginning. Not just about how it should look, because that's actually the last part of it, but what features should be in it? Who are we actually aiming this at? Are they interested in it? So to do user research very, very early days, that is the key. So get your UX designers on board, get them on board from day one. Basically, as soon as the ink is dry on the contract, that's when the UX designer should start working.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
If there is a so easy solution for the terms and condition problem, why it's not commonly used, why it's not the best practice?
Beats me. Honestly, I don't know. But I mean, I see also with the password thing, people are doing it because everybody else is doing it. You know, QR codes are being put in because everybody else is putting QR codes in. There are a lot of people who don't ask why, who are saying that's how we've always done it. So unless you actually take these things up and look at them again critically and saying, why are we doing this? Think about it again. Then something like that might actually happen. But I wish it would happen everywhere. Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else?
Just shortly, what sources of education would you recommend for us? Like maybe some specific books or
All
talks?
right, that's a good idea. That's a good question. There are certain vendors out there, if you will, who are selling UX courses. Some of the good ones are UIE. It's a company run by Jarrett Spool. They have some really good courses. There's also Nielsen Norman Group, which is where Jacob Nielsen comes from, and Don Norman, for those of you who know him. They also have quite a lot of courses that are quite good. That's if you want to take actual courses. If you want to read books, to get in the right mindset, it's not particularly targeted at software development, but to get in the right mindset of thinking about the user and how we perceive the everyday, then The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman is a really good book. If you want to get more concrete about it, I would get some of Jacob Nielsen's basic books. There's also some by Jenny Priest, there's some by Ben Snyderman. There's quite a lot. There's Stephen Krug's Don't Make Me Think. There's Alan Cooper's The Inmates Are Running the Asylum. All of these are really good all-round basic books that will give you the right insight, the right frame of mind to actually start working in this.
Right, there was also somebody over there, remember?
What is the example of the greatest UX design you ever seen? Maybe some application or website?
Oh, that's a good question as well, because some people tend to start out well And then they end up suffering from featureitis. Apple is a really good example of that because the early iPhones were really, really good. And the latest ones are just really bloated. And that's because, I mean, how else are you going to keep justifying that people should buy new? And people tend to think that they can only put in more features. And honestly, I think it's a shame. And we see that over and over again. You know, these small startups that has a brand new product and it does very little, but what it does really well. And then as they grow as a company, then they start adding features and features and features. And the UX suffers as a consequence. So I won't, you know, target anyone in particular and saying that's where you should go, because in 2 years that's probably not the case. I've seen it over and over again that the UX suffers over time.
All right, anybody else?
There's some in the back as well.
One thing about QR, supposedly they're popular in Asia. I don't know how much it's true. That's, I've heard South Korea is kind of fond of them. I don't know if it's a feature creep coming from there, that it's people wanted it because maybe they saw it somewhere. I don't know how much this is true. And there's one more thing about the checkbox Oracle and Task GVs and that kind of thing. It's kind of been illegal since 2012 or slightly earlier in the entire EU. Mark and Spencer in UK were settled for undisclosed sum for having such things in their shops, filling blanks, and had to pre-check the checkbox, so they're not legal to do them at all.
And it's true, but when it's true it's not legal, but when it doesn't have any consequence to break that.
Oh, it does. It's against GDPR. It does. It's data protection law. Oh, it does. It's GDPR covered very much.
Yeah, true. With the new GDPR,
No, it's data protection. It's data protection before GDPR. This is just extension.
Okay.
Mark and Spencer settled on data protection. GDPR was not enforced yet when they did that.
But that's good. I love that it's being reinforced. Unfortunately, you can still, I don't have to look very hard to find examples where it's broken. And I guess it's because whoever is policing those laws, they can't be everywhere at once. So there's still people who are breaking them on a daily basis and are getting away with it. I hope it catches up with them eventually, for sure.
Okay, let's take 2 more questions. I think you had one.
How do you collaborate with software engineering on the daily basis?
Great question. Great question. As I said, designers should be involved right from the beginning. And that also means that we shouldn't be sitting in a silo somewhere where all the UXers sit and then you can go there and ask them stuff. The way we organized in my part of Elsevier is that all of my designers are sat with the development team on a daily basis. They're not a part of the UX, well, they are part of the UX team, but they belong as a resource in the development team, and they are part of that team just like all the developers. The reason being that way you have your finger on the pulse with what is being developed, what are the current headaches that the developers are facing, and it becomes a lot easier for the developers to just, you know, reach out to the desk next to them and saying, could you please have a look at that? I'm having a hard time making this work. Or I can't get hold of this data. What if we do this instead? And then that way, if that collaboration is truly fruitful, it becomes almost like a co-design session. Because we don't know everything, and you don't know everything. You know what's technically feasible. I know what is usually easy for the users. And together, if we keep the dialogue open, we can create really great design that really works well for the users. But if we separate it, chances are I'll end up doing a design that as soon as you see that, it's like, yeah, good luck with that, because that can't be done. So I make better designs if I'm close to my developers and can run it by them continuously and saying, does this make your hair stand on end if I ask you to develop this? Because then usually very quickly my developers can say, you know what? Precisely that is really hard, but what if we do this instead? And then we start co-designing. So that is by far the preferred way to work, working really closely together, being part of the team, not being on a pedestal somewhere. Absolutely not.
Okay, and the last question? Okay.
Hi. What about developers who are working on APIs for other developers? They are also creating some kind of experience for them. So are there any resources about that? Any tips for them?
I love that you're asking that question because it's something that has come up lately. It's only about the last year or something like that I've heard about it, but it's absolutely true. Even APIs is something that has users, which is essentially you guys. So obviously there should be some thought put into the design of that. I wish I had resources for you. I honestly don't know any resources out there. I can have a look around, and if I get your contact details, I can see what I can find. But off the top of my head, I don't know any resources. But it's something that has focus, and if it's not out there already, I'm sure it will be very shortly, because it has focus in general. I've heard a lot about it lately.
Okay, thank you.
All right, guys, thank you very much. Yeah.